Richard Burgeon, and the new person, Apsana Begum. She got elected in Poplar and Limehouse.
So it's 2 Labour MPs and 1 suspended MP.
Well, I like to think they're all 3 Labour, but yeah.
Okay, no, I'm just being accurate.
Yeah, no, you're quite right.
No.
Hi, Tarek. Susie here. I don't know if you can see me.
Hi, Susie. Hi, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Well,
thank you very much, everybody, for joining us tonight in this evening Zoom on the Assange case, What Next? In some ways, this has been quite a momentous week, and if I remember rightly, someone once said a week is a long time in politics. Not only have we had a 3rd lockdown and the dramatics in Capitol Hill in Washington, but we also shouldn't forget the excellent news of the fact that the extradition of Julian Assange was rejected by the judge at the Old Bailey on Monday. It's been a hard-fought victory for the campaigners and activists who have been working tirelessly for Assange's release. And we congratulate everyone in being involved. But the fight hasn't ended here, as the same judge has unjustifiably refused to grant Julian Assange bail in view. And in view of this, we're looking at tonight on how to appeal that decision. Our first speaker doesn't really need any introductions. He's a journalist, writer, and documentary filmmaker you'll all be familiar with, John Pilger.
Thank you. I've sat through, I suppose, most of the hearings that have tried to, that have been aimed at sending Julian Assange into the purgatory of the United States penal system. And that goes back almost 10 years. I didn't see the last one, but I saw it online, and they got most of what they wanted. It was very clever. The first part of her decision was really saying the journalists have no right of freedom, that we have no right to know, that we have no rights to call our governments to account, that we have no right to put before courts entirely credible evidence and expect those courts to act on it in proper due process. All those rights we do not have. That's what she said. She said it very clumsily. Anyone who's read her wretched judgment would understand that. It wasn't the judgment of a jurist. It almost read like a bad journalist. Because she isn't really a judge. She's a civil servant. She's a magistrate. But still, she's called a judge, and this court was a British court. And one expected due process. But there was due revenge right from the beginning. And whether it was in Westminster Magistrates Court or in the Old Bailey, the way the defence was treated was in bad faith, totally. And yet the defence won. It was an extraordinary effort. And I'd like to pay tribute here to my friend Gareth Pearce, who I introduced Julian to some 10 years ago. She has done a most extraordinary job, and so did the 2 QCs. In spite of Vanessa Baraitzer's obstructionist behaviour, her appalling vindictiveness towards the defence and towards Julian, when he was in court, they did come out with what all of us would regard as the most basic triumph, that Julian is not going to the United States. But unless the appeal is successful, their appeal, and I don't think that appeal will happen, and I think when this gets into a real court of law, whatever you might think of High Court judges, I think they will throw this out. But we shouldn't really be at this stage. The point I want to make is that we should all be alerted to the fact that this very clever judgment gave the United States, it gave the rapacious power the power of the United States and of Britain. It gave it what it wanted. It's successfully intimidated those journalists who might challenge it. And I have to say, I'm not one of those who continually say this is all about a free press, because we don't have a free press. It is about free journalism, and that's very rare. The free journalists are the honorable exceptions, but we need them. Julian was an honorable exception or is an honorable exception par excellence. And those are the people in my career I've always depended upon for the major stories that I've been involved in. People on the inside, whistleblowers, people who are prepared to take great risks in telling the truth and telling people that their governments are lying to them. The public service that Julian Assange has performed is extraordinary. None of that, of course, was recognized by this court, although the threat that he posed to this rapacious power, the rapacious power represented in Britain and particularly in the United States, was acknowledged. The way they treated him was because he is such a threat, because journalism is such a threat. One of the early documents that WikiLeaks leaked was a Ministry of Defense document about a warning of threats to, I suppose, to the establishment in this country. I can't remember the terms, the official terms they used. And they had three threats. There was the threat of the Russians, of course, Russian spies. They actually said Russian spies. There was the threat of terrorists, but the greatest threat, and they made this very clear, was investigative journalists. That is, those of us who do our job. There are very few of them. Julian is an exemplar of them, and that's why they went for him. He released information that was really beyond the imagination of many of us, such as the Vault 7, probably his most important disclosures, which revealed how American intelligence spy on us and attempt to manipulate all our lives. So Julian was a real threat for all the most noble and honorable reasons. So Vanessa Baraitser, I think the other night, Roger Waters described her very well as a foot soldier. She did her job quite well. They couldn't have it, of course, that Julian might go to the United States and his mental health would be in such a bad way that something bad might happen. They would have to explain that. Clearly, that concerned them. But what it came down to was saying that real journalism, honest journalism, revealing journalism, dissenting journalism, if you like, is something that suggests that there is something wrong with your mental health. That really goes straight to the heart of the old Stalinist system, where they used to put people in psychiatric hospitals. Of course, Julian has been damaged, I don't think irreparably, by his time in prison. But that's what this court is saying. Yes, we'll accept that Julian Assange can't go to the United States because he may well take his own life. So a journalist, a great journalist, is categorized as his journalism, if you like, is part of his mental illness. That's the subtext to this. Meanwhile, she reinforced all the issues that were put before this court, this political trial, all the political issues. She reinforced them. The good news is, I think that if it goes to appeal, as I said, Julian will be free. He may even be free if it goes to an appeal on the bail. I don't know, but at some point he will be free. Thanks.
Thank you very much, John, for that contribution. I'm sorry, it sounds like you're going to have to leave this evening, so you won't be able to answer the questions later on. But we'll certainly be keeping in touch with yourself with your great efforts on this front. Thank you, John.
Thank you.
Before I introduce our next speaker, can I just remind those of us in this session that if you want to ask a question, please send it into the chat box. We have had some already. If we get some time at the end, we'll ask them of our speakers. And also, you'll find other information, things like Stop the War mailing lists. If you want to be on them, that would be great. Right, our next speaker is the first of our parliamentarians. He was the Shadow Secretary of State for Justice and Lord Chancellor in the Shadow Cabinet of Jeremy Corbyn's from 2016 to 2020. He's the MP for Leeds East, Richard Burgon. Richard, the floor's yours.
Thank you very much, and it's great to be at this Stop the War event, because Stop the War, I feel, has not only always played an important role in our movement, but it's got a particularly important role to play in the years ahead, because if people think that the welcome booting out of Donald Trump means that there won't be campaigns to wage against war and for peace where the United States is concerned going forward, and I think they're sadly mistaken. So we'll be having to engage, I fear, in those campaigns in the years ahead, both in relation to our government here and its support for potential actions from the United States government. And when I was Shadow Secretary of State for Justice, I spoke at a fantastic meeting in central London in support of Jeremy, and I'm pleased to, in support of Julian, and I'm pleased to speak here tonight, because it's been a roller coaster of a week. The verdict to not extradite was, of course, wonderful, even if we disagreed with most of the ruling. The outcome itself is what we wanted, and it's what we fought for, but then we had the appalling decision on bail. So firstly, I just want to pass on my solidarity to Julian, of course, but also to his partner, Stella, and to Julian's children and to his parents. This case, of course, touches on fundamental issues in our society, issues of war crimes committed by states in our names, issues of the right of the press, the right of journalists to expose such crimes. But we should never, ever forget that at its heart, at the heart of this case, is an individual an individual who has been made to suffer so much for the work that he did as a journalist in exposing war crimes. This week's ruling to not extradite Julian should be the beginning of the end of that suffering, and we have to make it so. And so I just want to pay tribute to everyone who has fought on the right side of justice on this question, because without you, I believe Julian would have been extradited. At times, it's been tough. You've been disparaged. You've been mocked, but you have taken a principled stand and you have been proven correct. This is a case of political persecution, and political pressure can help to end it. But of course, we now have the decision to deny Julian bail. I believe this is deliberately cruel. Keeping Julian in prison when the judge herself identified mental health difficulties is going to add to the torture that the UN has already ruled that Julian has experienced. It appears to be an attempt to break Julian, an attempt to silence him, silencing a journalist who has been found guilty of no crime. It's a form of punishment, a lesson to Julian, but also a lesson to all of the journalists and those who seek to raise issues of justice and issues of war crimes. It's already appalling enough that Julian has been held in prison on remand for years. It's especially cruel given he is effectively in solitary confinement for much of that and has been detained in a prison where COVID has posed a risk to his health and to his safety. Julian Assange has not committed any crime in Britain for which he should be in prison. He should have been allowed out to walk out of that court, free to live his life, free to get on with his life, free to rebuild his life with his family and friends while the appeal was heard. And if monitoring was deemed necessary, there are of course other ways of monitoring him, ways that could have allowed Julian to be with his family, to recover his health, to work and to prepare for his case properly, something he won't be able to do in prison. So I want to commit tonight to doing everything that I can to support Julian getting out on bail. I will help to get the biggest parliamentary campaign possible on this. I recently wrote to the Justice Secretary, along with other Labour, Tory and SNP MPs, asking for a video meeting with Julian, and we'll be pushing for that when Parliament returns next week. And we need to work out what and any role the Justice Secretary has in determining where and what conditions Julian is held in. And then we need to apply the greatest possible pressure to ensure Julian is held in conditions where he is as safe and as well as possible while we fight for his release. On the wider issues, while we welcome this ruling in terms of its outcome, many of the aspects are still very worrying. There are deep concerns that we all raised about this case before Monday's verdict ruling, and they still apply. Extradition was stopped only due to Julian's poor health and because of the appalling nature of the US prison system. The ruling trashed many important principles that we long fought for and that we must fight to be upheld in the future. That the judge claimed that extradition would not breach the bar on extradition for political offences is a very worrying argument. This case, make no mistake, has always been political. Julian Assange exposed war crimes in Afghanistan, war crimes in Iraq, the horrors of Guantanamo Bay. What could be more political? Of course it's political. What could be more political than that? The case has always been about political persecution, the targeting of someone for exposing matters of war, which is something that the political elites believe is something that only they should be allowed to consider. And so any claim that this is not political is absolutely absurd. And along with the Harry Dunn case and other examples, shows that the US-UK Extradition Act is not fit for purpose. It's one-sided. It needs rewriting. And a number of MPs will be working together to examine how we can be raising this over the coming weeks. Also, the judge dismissed the claim that prosecution under the US Espionage Act set a dangerous precedent for press freedom and criminalised investigative journalism. But of course it does. Of course it does. Because it sends a chilling warning to everyone that they should not do what Julian Assange did. And that is what it's designed to do. An unprecedented attempt to criminalise journalism. And so, working with the National Union of Journalists and others, we need to be fighting for a change in the law so that no such extradition is possible from our country, whatever the laws in another country. And finally, as members of Parliament, we need to do everything we can to lobby the new Biden administration to drop the appeal. Joe Biden should start his presidency by dropping the cases. If he wants to show that the United States is moving in a new direction after a number of particularly dark years indeed, then dropping the appeal against Julian Assange would be a clear signal of doing that. So a great injustice has occurred. We got the outcome that we wanted, but a great injustice still continues. It needs remedying in relation to Julian's own situation as we speak. It also needs remedying in relation to the law more widely as it stands in favour of journalistic freedom, in favour of not preventing the exposure of war crimes. So there's a lot of work for us all to do, but I want to finish my remarks by congratulating Stop the War and everyone who has fought against war and everyone who has fought for justice for Julian Assange and for press freedom to expose war crimes.
Thank you very much, Richard, for the contribution. I'm glad to see you'll be leading parliamentarians in keeping the pressure on Julian Assange's case, and I hope the video conference goes well with the cross-party consensus that you've got amongst other members. That would be hugely appreciated by all. Our next speaker is a writer, filmmaker, and editor. He's written many books on history and politics and 7 novels. Tariq Ali. Can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
We can now.
Yeah. Okay. I won't repeat what has already been said because it then really does become incredibly dull. Basically, to make 3 points. One, that the decision to prosecute Assange from the very beginning, and the information coming out from Sweden, from various civil libertarians there, is that it was a clear attempt to extradite him to the United States. Julian, when he first said that the reason he wouldn't go back to Sweden was because the Swedish government was weak and would extradite him, has been proved absolutely correct. That was the aim. And all those in The Guardian and other liberal outlets who said, oh, he's paranoid, why should the Americans want him? This was actually written in sections of the British media, have been proved completely wrong from the very beginning. They wanted him back in the United States so they could punish him. And the reason for the punishment, what's happened, Murad? Are you all right?
I'm okay. It must be someone else. Can we have everyone else muted, please? Who's joined us?
The reason for the persecution and prosecution of both Chelsea Manning, who shouldn't be forgotten, and Julian, to whom she supplied her information, is not simply revenge. That is part of it. It's to deter other leakers from coming forward. Do not leak confidential stuff. If you do, we will punish you as much as we can. Look what we did to Chelsea Manning and to Julian Assange. If you want to go through all this, then by all means try it on. What they forget, it's a very foolish argument, is that most people who decide to make stuff public are not political activists. They are ordinary people by and large, in some cases quite conservative. I mean, if you look at Edward Snowden, he worked for the CIA. And what happens is they discover something which is horrific to their consciences, and they cannot keep it. It's too outrageous to them. Whereas, funnily enough, to some of us, it might not be so outrageous because we know about these things. But they get shocked and they come out. Ellsberg did it with the Pentagon Papers in Vietnam and was traduced, attacked for a long, long time, by the way. But the New York Times did publish it. And with Chelsea and Julian, the stakes were much higher. And so they want it as a warning to people, but it's not going to work for the reasons I've just pointed out. That people who get so angry as individuals, it's usually a case of individual conscience, whether it's war crimes, whether it's corruption in governments, whether it's corporate malfeasance, whatever it is, it angers an individual and she or he comes out and does it. So it's not going to work as a deterrent, leave alone as revenge. Now, looking at the judgment, which I did read, painful reading, because it is, as John Pilger said, very, very badly written. But basically, it is a judgment which defends the political charges against Julian, says that he would be perfectly safe being tried in an American court of law after all this publicity and senators saying he should be sentenced to death and should be killed and bumped off. It would be fine and safe, says Vanessa Baraitser. But I think this is a face-saving device that they have adopted. It's not that Julian is not being subjected to a form of psychological war. It is all that, as Niels Meltzer has said, as doctors who inspected Julian at this wretched prison wrote in a letter to the government a year and a half ago, saying his medical state is not good, ignored by the government, given short shrift by Vanessa Baraitser, as was Niels Meltzer's testimony. So what is this? That the American prison system, the incarceration in the United States is awful? Well, yeah, it is. But is Belmarsh now a humanitarian zone? No. Everyone knows that. Conditions there are awful, as we see when Julian is being brought to the court. So I think the entire basis of this judgment is fake, but I think when it goes to appeal, it's going to be very difficult now for an appeal court, given the modest advance that had been made, to take that back. So I don't think, I hope I'm wrong, I don't think Julian is going to be extradited, though bear in mind that the last decision on this, the courts, both the appeal court or any other court, can be overruled in cases of extradition by the Home Secretary. Well, we know who the Home Secretary in Britain is at the moment. I think we're all aware of that, but i.e. it'll be a government decision. It's a decision that will be made by Johnson, and if the appeal court backs up what this court has done, they will probably say for reasons of health, which is a cop-out, of course, as we know, but at least it will get Julian out, his health recovering, and hopefully he will carry on doing what he has done so far, and even more people will join his groups and try and leak stuff, because this is the last point I want to make, is that the coverage of the trial in all the newspapers in the English-speaking world, which utilized WikiLeaks to get their big scoops and win prizes on the back of Manning and Julian Assange, did appalling coverage. It was barely covered the trial when it should have been covered every single day. So one can't expect too much from them. I mean, The Guardian, which published the revelations in 2011, would never do so today. The paper has been transformed, quite honestly, beyond, one can't recognize any aspect of the old Guardian, not just on the sort of investigative journalism, but on opposing US activities abroad. So we are very pleased and happy that this judgment has been made, even though the bulk of it is appalling. We hope the appeal court will give Julian bail when they apply, I think tomorrow or Monday, before the Americans appeal again. It's no good expecting Biden to do too much, because we should recall that the decision, the initiative that was taken to prosecute Assange was not Trump or the Republicans. It was Eric Holder, Obama's Attorney General, who initially set this whole thing into motion. So they might have behind the scenes words saying we're not going to pursue it, because it does pose problems for the American Constitution. If you're going to charge Assange when you get him there for spying or whatever, it puts the fundamentals of the American Constitution at risk in terms of freedom of expression and freedom of press, and the New York Times is bound to attack this, as will other papers in the United States if these charges are laid. That's all.
Thank you, Tariq, for reminding us about some of the other extradition cases. Can I just remind you that one particular one that I was involved in, Tullah Hassan from Tooting, he was actually extradited, and we did try and get him on health grounds, not for him to be extradited. And since his return, he's been a broken lad. I've not seen anyone as badly broken as that in a very, very long time. So it doesn't just affect the Julian Assanges of the world, it affects a lot of ordinary folk as well, making their voices heard on global issues, whatever they may be. Thank you, Tariq. Our next speaker is part of the new set of MPs that joined us in December 2019, representing her home turf in Poplar and Limehouse, Absana Begum. Absana, are you there?
Thank you so much, Murad, and thank you to Stop the War for organising this event. Good evening, everyone. I want to begin by talking about the Iraq War. I was 13 years old and marched against the Iraq War. The war destroyed the lives of so many Iraqis and caused destruction to the region, but it also devastated my community here in East London, and the consequences of that war are still felt now. The collateral damage video that Julian Assange and WikiLeaks released, and all of that evidence, confirmed to many of us what we know, what we knew at the time and what we know now, but also showed us in so much detail how much was being done in our names. These actions showed the need to preserve press freedom, but also displayed the threat that is being posed to the American and British states as a result of these investigations. Our state's actions abroad have helped foster the climate of the hostile environment at home. Since the Iraq War, we've seen extraditions, renditions to abroad, and at home, we have seen our communities spied on. In our communities, in our mosques, in our schools, and in our universities. In my part of the country, we know too well that we must never embark on illegal wars and imperialism abroad. And the telling of the truth, which is what Julian and WikiLeaks did, help us tell our government that and remind them of that every day. This government's increasing draconian approach seeks to strip away the very freedoms that people like me hold dear. Currently, it's seeking slowly but surely to whittle away accountability, to whittle away our human rights. From the Spy Cops Bill, which gives impunity for crimes to security services, to the Overseas Operations Bill, which gives impunity for crimes abroad. In this context, it's really hard not to understand the verdict on Julian Assange this week as another iteration of the expansion of international state suppression of people and the criminalization of journalism. On the international stage, we must stand up for the values we share of justice, human rights, and democracy, and working with others to keep people safe by ending conflict and tackling emergencies like the climate emergency and injustices across the world. What happens somewhere else impacts us here at home. And we are stronger when we stand up for the rights and when we say that our state will respect those fundamental rights. The American government is doing the opposite of this. Our government are doing the opposite of this. And that's why it's so important for free press to be preserved because of this. I had the privilege of joining Julian's team at the final hearing a few months ago, and I was really appalled at the way in which, even at the summary hearing, the way it was handled, in particular the conduct of the judge. I was really shocked throughout the hearing, and I'm reliably informed that that wasn't even the worst of the 20-something days the hearing went on for. But I was really, really appalled. And I'm here to reaffirm my commitment that as an MP, I will commit to work to help free the political prisoner that is Julian Assange, for the greater good of the people in this country, for press freedom, for my constituents, and in particular concentrating on the reviewing of the US-UK extradition treaty, because I think that also needs to be looked at. We should not be prosecuting people like Julian Assange. We should be prosecuting war criminals like Tony Blair and those people that went and devastated that region in our names instead. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Apsana. I'm glad to see you're keeping an interest in such affairs as well as all the local issues in your part of London. Just before I introduce our next speaker, can I encourage all of yourselves that aren't members of Stop the War to become members? We can only host events like this Zoom event if we have the membership to support it. We're a membership-led organisation, and we do respond to events like Julian Assange's pardon on Monday, but also to events that we think can make an impact. Like on the 25th of January, we'll be joining our colleagues in America to highlight the plight in Yemen and stopping the war, as well as the humanitarian assistance that's needed there to get Yemenis out of that attempt by the Saudis to kick them into the Stone Age. It's very important that we have new members and fresh blood, and I hope you'll take this opportunity to join us in the cause of these battles across a number of fields. Right, our next speaker is another film director, actually, and I'm actually new to her and her to me. She's a filmmaker producer who's been a committed supporter of Julian Assange throughout his detention. Susie Gilbert. Susie.
Thanks so much, and thank you to Stop the War, and thanks for everyone who's on this call. I know we've got hundreds of activists who've been fighting for years on this case, and it's been a tough journey. And so I'd like to focus on three positive things, and I agree with everything that's been said to date, but I'd like to see focus on areas of progress. Firstly, as I said, it's been a super long journey over years and years and years, and we have a tremendous amount of positive momentum right now. There has been a global movement to support Julian. We've seen statements from Lula, Dilma, Evo Morales, Correa, AMLO this week. It's easy to get jaded by some of the UK and US media, the lack of attention to this case. But let's remember, there is a huge international movement in support of Julian who care about these issues. And so we need to keep that going for the coming weeks. The tide is turning. The narrative on this case has changed. All the mainstream media all have put out editorials in support of Julian against the extradition. and all the leading human rights groups and press freedom groups have come out against the extradition. So we're not down those rabbit holes of discussing Sweden and having to explain all these details. We're now in a much more positive place, and we must keep that positive momentum going over the coming weeks. So hats off to everyone who's been outside the court at 3 a.m. holding spots for Reporters Without Borders so they could access the courtroom. You know, they've been doing the grassroots work, keeping this going. I'd like to mention two other positive things. One is, as much as we would have loved to see the judge rule in Julian's favor on the other more political points, Julian has won this case on arguably the most watertight issue when it comes to the higher court for appeal. In that, Judge Baraitser has, knows mental health issues well. She judged on pretty straightforward facts on the brutality of the US prison system and on Julian's mental health. Those issues are arguably the least political. And when they go to a higher court, they will be arguably the hardest to overturn because the High Court already has a precedent of ruling in favor of people like Julian because of the Lori Love case, where they ruled in his favor. So again, I think that should make us feel strong going into any appeal. And if an appeal happens, it could happen as early as April. And if Julian wins, he could be out, as early as May, June. So we're really hopefully in the final stretches of this horrific decade-long fight. And I think let's keep focusing on the fact that he is entering in a positive position for this potential appeal. Next, we saw on Monday a story that came out from NPR in the US, National Public Radio, where an prosecutor who was leaving the US Department of Justice was opining on the fact that the Biden administration might drop the prosecution. He was saying, well, it's a matter of resources and where we want to focus our energies. Who knows if it's true? But the fact that a DOJ official is being quoted as there being rumors of this being dropped is interesting. And I think we should make noise about that Biden should follow the Obama's DOJ's legacy in deciding not to pursue this case and not to prosecute Julian. And given that we are also in a Stop the War meeting, I think it's important to remember that, tangent, but Biden is not a Mr. Anti-War. He was a key architect of the Iraq War. And there's a great short film you can watch about that, should you want to, called Worth the Price. So we need to push Biden. We still need to make noise for a Trump pardon. I know there's a lot of chaos and all the news cycle is rightly distracted, but Trump, as we know, is unpredictable. He hates the deep state. He would love to piss off Hillary Clinton. And if he has sadly pardoned some Blackwater contractors who murdered Iraqi civilians, maybe he might be, willing to piss off some deep state enemies and pardon Julian. You never know. He's an unpredictable child. So again, to recap, I would say we have a lot of positive momentum in the movement right now. Let's keep pushing. We are entering a possible, appeal against the US on very strong grounds, where there's a legal precedent, where other cases, Lori Love was not overturned. And finally, there are rumors that this prosecution could be dropped. And so hats off to everyone on this call who's been working on this campaign, where at times when it's been difficult to campaign on this, people have been vilified. And so, thank you, and it's great to be amongst you all.
Thank you very much, Susie, for your contribution. Yes, there is momentum now, and let's make the most of it. And you're right, it is truly global. Today, we've got people listening in from Ireland, Germany, and Mexico. So it just shows the reach that we have, not only Stop the War, but this issue in itself. And there are people also, I think, from Australia following us and asking questions that they want answered. So let's certainly do that. Our next speaker really doesn't need any introducing. He was a previous chair of Stop the War, a previous leader of the Labour Party, the MP for Islington North, Jeremy Corbyn. Jeremy, the floor's yours.
Murad, thank you very much. And if you'd seen on the strapline, there's just been a reminder there's Terry Harper in from South Africa as well. So the audience is truly global. Welcome, Terry, and welcome everyone else to this call from all over this country and indeed all over the world. And the points that Susie just made are so true and so valuable that this is a campaign that's got to be kept going by our own actions, by our own access to media, and whatever way we can mobilize people. And so I will also be joining the global call on January the 25th in support of the people of Yemen and pointing out the horrors of the war in Yemen and the way in which arms from this country, the United States, have been sold to Saudi Arabia, which have been used to bomb and kill people in Yemen, which now has some of the worst health problems anywhere in the world. Not one of those health problems caused by any natural situation, entirely caused by a war against the people of Yemen. And so we have to speak out against it. Somebody says, Nicole, and I'm upside down. Is this true?
Not to me, Jeremy. You look upright.
Well, whoever it was who said that, maybe they should turn their phone round.
Yeah.
This is the age of the Zoom. We have to get used to this stuff. What I would also say is that Julian's case has been one of many incidents of the way in which establishments on both sides of the Atlantic have treated those who dissent from the norm. The norm was that if the United States decided to go to war somewhere, Britain would go to war somewhere. So we went into Afghanistan, and the refugees flowed afterwards, after the deaths and the killing. We went into Iraq, and thousands died, thousands more became refugees, and we now have the slightly bizarre spectacle of mass demonstrations in Baghdad for the removal of all American troops from Iraq. Perhaps not so surprising, but nevertheless, compared to what we were told at the time, quite an amazing turn of events. But all this question about arms supplies, wars, and preparation for wars, and the dishonesty that went around it, is something that Julian spent years exposing. Julian and WikiLeaks exposed the dishonesty and the way in which security services from a number of countries undermined democracy and brought about wars. And the victims of wars are always the poorest, always the most vulnerable, always those that end up either dead or in refugee camps, living in the poorest homes that get bombed by high-tech weapons from above. More money spent on the weapons than on the healthcare of those that are being bombed. And so I want to say to Julian, actually, you're a whistleblower. And in certain circumstances, whistleblowers get applauded. In certain circumstances, whistleblowers get protected. In certain circumstances, whistleblowers are turned into heroes by our media. But Julian Assange, who is the whistleblower of all time, because he's exposed some of the biggest lies of all time, is one that has suffered the most. And I want to say, first of all, thank you to those that have been corrected, by the way. He's not a whistleblower, but he is in a sense that journalists are whistleblowers. Somebody else has come on the chat box and recorrected my correction of the correction, if you understand what I mean. I'm going to stop reading the chat box actually and carry on with my speech. What I would also say is that I want to put on record my thanks to all of his legal team for the work that they've done, because amazing work has been done. Jennifer and so many others, but in particular, I want to say thank you to Gareth Pearce, not just for this, but for a lifetime of standing up for the most difficult cases and fighting them through in the legal system and ensuring many people have got justice that they would never otherwise have got that justice. The decision of the judge to find that Julian should not be removed to the United States on health grounds is a very interesting one, and as Susie was saying, actually is a very strong legal argument. And I'll come back to the other arguments in a moment. Very strong legal argument. What I don't follow, however, is that if his health, as it is so much in danger by the years of incarceration and the potential incarceration in the prison system in the United States, then why is he being left in Belmarsh, one of the most intense security prisons in Britain, with all the dangers that are associated with that for somebody in Julian's condition? Absolutely disgraceful. And so I do hope that the appeal against the refusal of bail is successful, so that he will get somewhere that he can live and be in a safe place whilst we fight the rest of it through. What I would also say is we should recognise that the international support that's been offered by so many people, initially by the government of Ecuador, but by a number of other governments, is very, very important. And the way in which the media in those countries have reported it is so very different to the way in which the media in this country have reported it. Richard Bergen was reporting to the Socialist Campaign Group a while back, saying he found it extraordinary that this event that was going on for week after week in the courts in London on Julian's case was getting almost no publicity in the British media. Yet all around the world, people were reporting it. It's something very odd that the British media seem incapable of reporting a major story right on their doorstep. And so the decision by President Andrés Manuel López Obrador of Mexico to offer a place of safety and residence in Mexico for Julian, if he wishes to take it up, I think is a very important and very remarkable offer. And indeed, I've sent Andrés Manuel a message of thanks and support, and I believe I'm speaking for thousands of people in this country in saying thank you to Andrés Manuel for putting this forward. As has been pointed out by Tarek and others, deportation issues under extradition law in finality are actually political decisions. You can go through all the legal processes you like, but at the end of the day, the extradition works only on the signature of the Ministry of the Interior in most countries, in this country, the Home Office. When I raised the issue with the Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, in question time in the House of Commons last year, he gave me an answer, and I've said this before, I was not expecting at all. I had perhaps wrongly expected that he would tell me basically to get lost. He didn't at all. He said that he thought that the extradition arrangements between Britain and the United States were very one-sided, and he was not happy with them. Well, you can say that again, but at least he said that and accepted some of the argument that I was putting forward. And so the case in support of Julian is overwhelming. The case against the Iraq War and the other wars is equally overwhelming. And this, in a sense, is a continuation of all of the anti-war work that we were doing from 2001 onwards, from 9/11 onwards. And so the way to win this is important to keep up the pressure, keep up the publicity, keep up the demands on him, because it's only by that constant pressure we will get the result that we need. Now, I hope that the case never gets as far as the Home Secretary making a decision, because knowing the current government as well as I do, and watching their performance as well as I do, as we all do, one would be very concerned about that. But a campaign on both sides of the Atlantic is very important. And I just have to say in passing that I would have been far happier if our good friend Diane Abbott had been Home Secretary now rather than Priti Patel, because she's somebody that actually believes in justice and believes in protection of people that have stood up and voiced the truth about others. So, campaign, support, and speak out. That is very, very important that we do that. Thank and support the legal team, and send a message to Julian of the support that he has, the affection that many people have for him, for the way in which he's exposed the truth that many others would not. And in all the calls that we're going to be doing globally, and that we're doing far more of that because of COVID, actually, strangely, in this corona crisis, there's a greater sense of international understanding and solidarity than there ever was before, because people have realized how easy it is to get an international call together in which we can actually listen to and understand each other's point of view. And that makes the movements that we are for peace, for justice, for liberty, for democracy much stronger as a result of that. And so, Murad, thank you very much for this, and thank you to Stop the War. I never thought in 2001 we'd still be here 20 years later, still campaigning on many of the same issues. But thank goodness we did, have done, do now, and always will, as long as we're needed. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Jeremy, for that contribution. And just to emphasize, whilst you were talking, we've had people from Brazil, Velma, making the point that we've got an audience in Brazil, Scotland too, Caroline Robinson, and France, David Kilby, and others. So it truly is possible to go global on Zoom. And dare I say, it's been one of the benefits of these lockdowns that we've been moved on to using new technology in this way. Now I come to our final speaker, who's in some ways got the wooden spoon on this, but I know he's more than capable of dealing with all the matters that may have been covered by our previous speakers. It's John Rees, who's a founding member of Stop the War, as well as an officer today. John.
Thanks very much, Murad. I just want to deal with the arguments about what we should be doing now, because the situation has been transformed by the judgment on Monday. Now, we obviously don't like a great deal of what was said, 95% of that judge's judgment, and I'll come on to what we should do about that in a moment. But we should understand that the lifting of the threat of extradition on whatever grounds is an enormous watershed in this case. It means that Julian does not currently isn't currently threatened with being taken into the United States, tried on espionage charges, and thrown into a very dark hole in the US penal system. Now, of course, he should have been immediately released on bail, and that's an issue that we'll address as well. But for a moment, step back and think on this, that for the first time in the best part of a decade, the situation for Julian Assange has improved. That this now looks like a very, very winnable battle for him and for the rest of us. And to be honest, if you're in politics long enough, you'll realize that all victories don't come as cleanly or as pristinely as you would have wanted them. But nevertheless, when people look back on this, they will only see two things. The United States tried to get him and they didn't succeed. And that is what will matter more than any other single thing. So take heart from that decision. And now let's survey the territory that we have to fight on now that that decision has been taken. First of all, that decision has to be defended. The United States has said that it will appeal that decision in the High Court. It may not come to that. The Biden administration may not go down that route. But at the moment, very clear in the bail hearings, the US lawyers are preparing an appeal. Now, that will be fought over the only condition on which Vanessa Baraitser lifted the threat of extradition, and that is that the American prison system is so bloody awful that somebody with mental health issues would be a risk of suicide if they were put into them. So that's the grounds on which the appeal will be fought. Now, I've got no interest, and I don't think any of us have got any interest in fighting that appeal on the basis of trying to calibrate exactly how mentally ill Julian is, or exactly what his autism amounts to. That's what the United States will do. That's how low they've sunk. That's where they'll fight this right in the gutter. We want to fight on the other half of this argument, that the American prison system is so brutal, in the words of this judge, and a judge very sympathetic to the Americans, but in her language, it is an oppressive system. And we know that to be true. There is a mountain of evidence about the way in which particularly the Supermax prison, particularly the special administrative measures under which Julian would be held, in which he would only have 2 phone calls a month to anybody outside his legal team. That would be the sole contact with his family. Now, there's a mountain of evidence about how brutal the American prison system is, and an important part of the campaign all the way up and through this appeal, if it takes place, will be for the whole of society to know loud and clear that this is not a system into which any human being should be put, and particularly not one who is vulnerable. So that's going to be an important part of our campaign, to get that voice, to get that information out there. And of course, we also want to be fighting for him to be immediately released. He should have been released on bail. I was talking to one of Jeremy's colleagues in Parliament, an MP, actually a Tory MP, who said he couldn't believe that Julian hadn't just walked out of the court a free man on Monday after the threat of extradition was lifted. Now, he's being held because the United States claim, and the judge agreed with him, that he's a flight risk. But that is nonsense. Because of that judgment, and this is what's very odd about Vanessa Baraitser, she couldn't seem to get her head around the significance of her own judgment. Because she ruled that there is no grounds on which he should be extradited, the United Kingdom is now the safest place in the world for Julian Assange. If he were to go to any other country, the United States could initiate a fresh set of extradition proceedings. He would be rearrested and dragged all through this again. He is not going to leave the United Kingdom when he's just had a judgment in his favour, a judgment which has every chance of being upheld on appeal, because there has never been an extradition that's been quashed on these grounds and then won again at the appeal stage. So he's safest here, and with the best chance of upholding the quashing of the extradition treaty in a British court, he is simply not going to go anywhere else. That's quite apart from the fact that his family, his partner, his children are all here. And we need to take up this argument about the safety of Belmarsh as well. Now, the judge accepted yesterday in court, simply on the word of the Belmarsh authorities themselves, taken to the court by the American prosecution, that there are only 3 COVID positive cases in Belmarsh. Now, I'm sorry, in London, 30% of the population is COVID positive. It absolutely beggars belief that that figure is not the same or worse in Belmarsh. It simply cannot be true that there are only 3 COVID positive patients in Belmarsh. And if there are, by the way, if it is indeed the safest place in London, perhaps we should all head down there and ask for asylum to save ourselves from the threat of infection by COVID. But if that's true, then why is it in lockdown? Why is it that Stella Morris can't visit Julian Assange if it's so safe for her and everybody else to go into Belmarsh? This simply doesn't make sense. So we have to campaign very, very clearly on the threat of being put into the American system. We have to campaign to get Julian out of Belmarsh as quickly as we possibly can. But we also have to keep on campaigning over the freedom of the press. The judge's judgment was a disastrous judgment for freedom of the press, a vicious, unpleasant judgment which upheld, in the words of the American prosecution, and sometimes indeed exceeding what the American prosecution had said in court, a very real threat to the freedom of the press. And just because the appeal will be fought on different grounds doesn't mean that this isn't important. The surrounding noise, the surrounding political atmosphere about freedom of the press is still the thing that has the best chance of influencing the judges and making sure that they uphold the quashing of the extradition case. So keep fighting on freedom of the press, keep fighting on the right of whistleblowers to tell you the truth about what your government's doing, keep fighting on the right of journalists to print it without the threat of imprisonment. And then we will have the best possible chance of making the case that somebody who did these things to all our benefits should not be thrown into a penal system which is oppressive. That's the case now. That's the direction we're heading in. We've won round one. Let's make sure that we won the final round as well.
Thank you very much, John, and giving us some ideas of where we have to go to now with Julian Assange's case here in the UK. Now, we've actually gone beyond the time that we had allotted. I'm going to ask a few questions anyway. If you can be patient for another 10, 15 minutes, I think it will be useful. And some of the questions which we've picked up from the chat line, I'm sorry we're not going to be able to address all of them, but we think that this touches a flavour of them. The first is from Daniel Lakin. He's a German journalist. Is there any statement by the British government on the Assange case at all? Is Richard there? Maybe Richard will be the best to ask that. One to Jeremy, possibly, because I think you'll probably be most informed. How have the developments relating to the Mexican offer of asylum to Julian Assange been developing? Are they still in existence or not? An update would be useful. That's from Jenny Cashman. And then a final one would be, well, it's a kind of a human one, and I'll give it to John Rees to end with. One can imagine how Julian feels right now, but my question is for anybody that has been in contact with him lately, how is he feeling right now? Did he get any encouragement, and is he in better spirits? Eric Marsenko. So, John, I'll leave you with that one at the end. Jeremy, if you can ask about the Mexican...
Thank you. Thanks very much for the question. And
they misuse that. They misuse. They misuse. They misuse.
They misused it in the bail hearing. I think I know what she's saying.
Okay, so okay, well,
AMLO thing, yeah. Okay,
well, whilst Jeremy's doing that, Richard, are you still there?
No,
he's left. He's left. Okay. Does anyone know about has there been a statement released by the British government at all?
I haven't heard of a statement made by the British government since the hearing on Monday. The Department of Justice in the United States issued a statement saying that they were very glad that it was upheld on all the other issues except the question of being put into the American prison system. But I haven't seen a direct statement from Priti Patel on this matter.
Okay. Susie, I understand you may well have been in touch with Julian. Do you know how he's feeling, how his spirits are?
I have not been in touch with him since in the last few days. I think John would know best.
Okay. It was just somewhat, I mean, we just want to get a sense of how he's feeling, and hopefully his spirits are up at least since.
John, are you aware of how he's been since the verdict?
Well, I only know what you could see, what you could see if you were observing the trial, which I was on the remote court system, and you know, he did have an enormous look of relief when that judgment came through. Not least because every single thing that the judge's summary took 45 minutes to read. For 40 minutes of that, anybody listening to it would have been absolutely convinced that he was going on the very next plane they could get him on to the United States. And it was only in the last couple of minutes that, I mean, I was live tweeting all the way through it. I was writing down what she was saying. I couldn't believe what I was writing, even though I was writing it, because it was so completely contrary to everything that had gone before it. So I think enormous relief. I'm sure Julian felt that the same as the rest of us did.
The judges do that. I've seen that at Heathrow. They literally, only said at the very end, but that's the way that I think they're trained to do it. Can I come back to Jeremy? The Mexican asylum offer, is that still available?
Well, let's be quite cautious on this.
Okay.
First of all, we have a fight on in this country to win the right to bail. And the points that John Rees made at the end of his contribution are very, very strong indeed, that if we win the case for him to remain in Britain, then that's fine. He can then make a decision about where he would wish to go at any other time of his life. The President of Mexico, Andrés Manuel López Obrador, made a very strong statement in support of Julian Assange and said that he will always be welcome to come to Mexico at a time of his choosing. He's not planning, as I understand it, to escape into the Mexican embassy or anything like that. What we're planning on, what I believe is being planned on, is just to fight the case legally through here. I think it's an important political statement that's been made by Andrés Manuel, and it shows that Mexico is acting in solidarity with all of us that are trying to support and protect Julian in exactly the same way that Mexico, to its eternal credit, acted to support Evo Morales when there was a coup against him in Bolivia. So I think we should make that point. The Mexican government said they supported him because he's an honest man who's defended freedom of the press and the right of the rest of the world to know the truth about what happened with Iraq and so many other conflicts around the world. So I think it's solidarity from Mexico and solidarity from us to Mexico as well.
Indeed, Jeremy. And on that note, I'm going to finish our session and just emphasize, please keep in touch with us by joining our mailing list for updates. Not only will you be updated with our efforts here in Julian Assange's campaign, but also the online global rally for Yemen that we're having on the 25th of January. That's the next important day for us, 5 days after Joe Biden gets into the White House, and we're doing it with our colleagues in America. So we really do want to make a global impact, and we would be on the streets but for COVID, but we're doing it by Zoom, and in some ways we'll probably we'll have as much an impact as we would have done on the streets, certainly globally, because we can get through to everyone through the technology. So thank you very much for all joining us tonight. Thank you very much to all our speakers, John Pilger, Tariq Ali, Susie, John Rees, Richard, Apsana, and of course Jeremy. Thank you very much all for making your contributions this evening, and thank you very much for everyone joining us from all over the world to show solidarity to Julian Assange and the next leg of his campaign to free him. Thank you very much for joining us tonight. Bye.
Thank you.